Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmid, also known as Mr. IoT. I am the Chief IoT Technologist for Deloitte with a deep passion for all things digital. This week on Coffee with Miss Connected and Mr. IoT, Kelsey and I are talking to Sri, I'm going to screw this up, Sri Peruvemba. Is that correct?
No, you actually did better than I.
Sri, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you. Thank you so much. You're the VP of Strategy for BeBop. What is BeBop?
Well, BeBop Sensors makes fabric sensors for a variety of different applications. Our whole idea is we believe humans are squishy and computers are rigid, and we are trying to connect squishy humans with rigid computers.
Sri, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, must have had a lag there. So squishy people with human computers, can you go into a little detail about what that means? Does that mean something that can go on my skin? Does that mean something that just is comfortable to sit on? Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So none of us have these flat surfaces in our body, just like you know, a computer device. If you remember the devices that were deployed, a few decades ago, where you'd have these watches that were rigid and clunky and rectangular, and even today, look at your car, right? You've got a beautiful dashboard that's well curved and it's got aesthetics and ergonomics all built in, and then there's a rigid rectangular display on it, or a rigid rectangular switch or button or whatever those are. And what we do is we make sensors using fabric. With our fabric, we can adapt to that particular shape or dimension and curvatures and so on, and that makes it very useful. So similarly, imagine our wrist. Take any example of some of the best wearable devices. They don't fit everybody. Right? Our wrists are not all the same. Whether you have them on your wrist or you have them on your shoulder, you're wearing devices on your head with like AR, VR set, we are all different. And we are squishy humans. And these computers, whether they are displays, whether they are sensor devices, whether they are wireless chips and so on and so forth, they're all rigid. But our job is to see if we can connect the two. So we make this flexible, customized sensor, fabric-based sensors that will allow humans to interact with machines much better than we've ever done before.
I have to tell you, when you said squishy, I laughed. That was really a great kind of description of how you made the stuff that's squishy and now it has feeling to it, and interesting analogy. Why BeBop? What does BeBop and squishy come together? I don't know. I always have a fascination with names.
Yeah, so the founder of BeBop, Keith McMillan, is an inventor. He's founded companies before. He's a serial entrepreneur. One of his prior companies is called Keith McMillan Instruments, that makes electronic instruments. And when we set out to go do this, we needed to be able to sense and be able to deploy electronic instruments that needed sensors. So BeBop Sensors was born, and BeBop refers to that genre of music. And and our sensor technology is a fabric-based sensor technology, as I mentioned before. And these are deployed already in these instruments. We have over 2 million of these things deployed in the Bop Pad and a whole bunch of other electronic musical instruments that are being deployed worldwide. Now we are able to take these sensors and put them in a whole host of new applications, both existing applications that had poor quality sensing technologies, as well as brand new emerging applications for which the traditional sensors will never work. So we've got a whole host of things that we are doing.
So in addition to that, I mean, usually when startups are born, it's because of some crazy application that seemed to be really viable, right, for the business. So Any other applications that are on your radar, whether they're kind of in the market or just in minds or in conversations?
Yeah, so this is one of these applications where it's not that easy to say it in words. It's even though you can see my hands, I can gesture enough for you to communicate this well. I can play a video for you, you'll still not be able to get it. You got to experience it. But let me see if I can attempt to describe, because I think you have probably experienced one of these. You have used VR sets, right? You put them on. They've got an awesome display, and the display technology keeps getting better. There are several megapixels on each of those displays to give you a very good visual image of what you're going through, what experience that you're encountering, whether it's a game or whether it's some other application. Then audio also is always good, and it keeps getting better. One of the things that is missing in a VR application is touch. You're absolutely right, it's touch. And so let me describe a simple application, and I'll describe something more complex. A simple application is, let's say you're playing a game. Somehow, to me, I'm not a gamer. Most people that play games are shooting something, right? And there's some object in front of you, and you're shooting. And you see an image, which is clear. Audio is very good. But when you squeeze the trigger, you don't get any feeling. Sometimes you'll have a handset where you may get some vibration. It vibrates the whole handset. However, one of the things we could do, which we have deployed a glove. It's a universal glove. Anybody can wear it. One size fits all. And we have sensors embedded in them, in the fingertips, along the finger, in the palm, and so on. So, and this is very, very sensitive. It works at about 6 milliseconds. So when you press this trigger, you can not only see your finger move, but you can also feel it, because we have haptic actuators, and it'll give you sensation of actually shooting a weapon. Right? That's a very simple application. Go to more complex ones in the same VR environment. Today, VR is quite popular among real estate agents, for example. Let's say you're trying to buy a home, and you're based in Boston, and let's say you're buying a home here in Silicon Valley. It may not be practical for you to fly down every time you want to see a home. And you may be able to don on one of these VR headsets, and you get a nice view of the home. But let's say you wanted to feel the wall, or you feel the carpet, or you feel something, and you can't do that today. But with our glove, you can actually do so. You can distinguish between different types of surfaces. And so it doesn't feel like virtual reality anymore. It feels like reality. And this is one of the things we do, is be able to give you that sense of touch. And it's very realistic, because our fabric sensors will adapt to your fingers, because they're flexible and they can be shaped. And we are able to very accurately, as well as extremely quickly, detect where your fingers are, and whether you're bending them, whether you're twisting them, whether you're pressing something. All of these things we can detect and be able to feed it to the system, and the system will interpret that data and give you some very useful information, as well as give you feedback that will make the VR more like R.
So you talk about a glove. Does that mean I could have a whole bodysuit, and then the thing knows everything about where I go? And I hope you have it in colorful patterns, because as you can tell, both Kelsey and I love our colors. But no, I mean, I'm only half joking. And I have a follow-up question to that. So is there sort of like the idea that you actually eventually all wear it, or is it really in areas where you're very touch sensitive, like on your hands?
So the answer to your question is yes. Because it's a fabric-based sensor, our fabric could be the inner lining of whatever garment you're wearing. So in the outside, it could be that exact shirt that you're wearing now, and you can have any color you want, whatever you want. But inside, in the lining, we could put our fabric sensor, and it can drape around your shoulders, your arms, whatever, and we can cut it to any shape. Obviously, we wouldn't want to deploy something that covers the entire body, because that's a lot of sensors may not be necessary. But we could cut little strips or little patches wherever you think you need them, right? Depending on the type of application. And that can sense. Think of a product like this. It can do many things. Not just this VR application where you've got a full body participation in this environment, but also think of all the medical type of applications, right from simple things like heartbeat. It can measure, for example, if you are exercising, if my trainer always says, hey, you got to get your heartbeat up to this level. Only above that you really get exercise. Below that, you're just having fun. You're not getting any exercise. So, these things can sense and be able to give you feedback. And imagine you combine the sensor that's monitoring, let's say, your heartbeat, and with haptics, either your fingertips or your wrist or wherever that is. You can give that feedback, and it'll tell you whether you should go faster or you should slow down and be in that zone. Those things are very practical applications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my mind's just racing, thinking about this and thinking about the great applications of this. One of the ones that I was thinking too, also along the lines of medical, but it's not really consumer. It's actually really surgical, right? Yeah. I mean, think how often you're with a patient and you're trying to really evaluate what's going on inside the anatomy. If you could measure flow, right? I mean, all of that just seems very interesting. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your business model. How are you getting this technology out there? What's been the reaction of the marketplace from it?
Like any startup, we get way more requests to deploy in different applications than we are able to do. My feeling is most startups say no to 98% of the requests that come in, and at least the good ones do. Because if you say yes to all 100, that's a sure sign that you'll fail. So we've picked a handful of applications where it makes sense. But we entertain lots of different ones because we are not smart enough to know which is the best application in the market, because it doesn't have anything to do with whether it's an existing application or an emerging application. Take AR, VR, for example. We've been talking about it for a few years. And the initial deployments, as a technology, has not been great. But now with sensors and haptics and all the others, it's getting better. But still, that is not a market that's mainstream yet. I'll talk about a market that is mainstream, where we've been able to deploy and be able to get some traction. And as soon as I mention this, you'll instantly be able to appreciate the value of this. So we've started deploying sensors in steering wheels as well as in the seat in an automobile. And without going into a lot of details, because we are working with probably one of the top 3, top 4 automobile manufacturers, as well as many of the suppliers that supply to that industry. In a steering wheel, as autonomous vehicles come about, you need to, today the rule is you have to have your hand on the wheel to engage your vehicle in some kind of driver assist. For example, I have a Tesla Model X, and on my steering wheel, if I take my hands off the steering wheel, the Tesla can no longer support that autonomous feature or the driver assist mode. And most automobiles just say that you have your hands on the wheel, but what is more important is knowing where on the wheel do you normally place your hands, because all of us don't place them in the same. You go to a driver's school, they tell you the 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock kind of configuration, right? But we don't. People do 11 and 1. Some people just do 12 or 3 and 9 and so on. And we are different, and we're not going to change. But knowing where your hands are placed are important. Second, how much pressure are you applying? All of this data is extremely important, not only to design the way you get a great automobile experience, but also be able to diagnose in case you have an accident, those kind of things. Same thing in the car seat. We are all not built the same. So, designing a car seat that is applicable to all of us, which is what is being done today, is not the best way. You could put these sensors and adjust the car seat dynamically so it suits you in a particular way, and make sure it relieves those pressure points. That would be a simple way And the other is, think of car seats where you have an infant placed in the car seat. So you want to make sure you know how that seat is designed, where the infants, usually it's an attachment to an existing car seat, right? It's an infant seat. And you need to know how that is placed, where the pressure points are, where the location is, so on and so forth, to offer better protection. And that's to the extent that will go into it, but there's a lot more details in a product like this, and this is a very practical application to that technology.
If you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, the Chief IT Technologist with Deloitte, and with me we have Kelsey Carvell from Deloitte and Sri Perovimba. I don't know, I butchered this again. Sri Perovimba. Yes, I got it right this time. I'm really kind
Yes, you did.
And we're talking about fabric sensors. So Sri, I got to ask you, you keep talking about sensors, but there has to be some processing. Where does the processing happen? Is this sort of like truly edge processing? I always find this funny to talk about the edge, because if you think about skin and then you have fabric on that's really on the edge. But I mean, I'm really curious, actually, on a serious note, what do you do? The sensor then connects. What about batteries? What about computers and so forth?
Yeah, so the way we start is we have a fabric, which is special fabric, and we coat that fabric with nanomaterials that will allow the fabric to conduct. And we are now able to cut that fabric into different sizes, shapes, and so on. And then we apply that fabric on a substrate. The substrate could be very thin plastic PET type material. It could be printed circuit board. It could be something else. And then we have conductive inks that trace from those sensors to the edge of whatever that device is. From there, we interface with the electronics. Most of the electronics tends to be in a little socket or some kind of assembly that may not be in the physical location where we are sensing, to keep that aware. Because those electronics,
how big are the electronics?
They're very tiny. For example, in our glove, so we have sensors on each fingertip, and the electronics kind of sits in the base. It's very small and very thin, maybe just a few millimeter thick and a few millimeter on the X and Y dimension. But our material itself is about 0.5 millimeter or less in thickness because it's fabric. And then, as I mentioned, we can shape it any way we want. In a glove kind of application, we will have strips of material for each finger and something in the palm. And from each of those traces, we are able to detect whether you're, whether you're pressing something versus whether you're bending your arm or you're twisting your hand. All of these different sensations, including stretch, we can measure all of these, and they give us very valuable data. So that's how. So we start from fabric, we coat the material, we cut and shape it, we then apply it to substrate. We have conductive inks that connect from our sensors to the electronics, and then it's deployed into a device. Most of the time, we don't make the device ourselves. We make the components. We are an ingredient brand. We are, we are what makes as I mentioned before, connect these rigid electronics to us squishy human beings.
So Sri, you mentioned a little bit about the data and what the data can provide and to whom. And so who really is collecting the data in these cases and owning it? And how does that typically play out when you have conversations with your customers or with consumers in the end?
Yeah. So it depends on the application. For example, if it's deployed in a wearable device, in most wearable device, the data is collected by that app for that device. And depending on the privacy settings and functions, you actually own your own data. And then you work with whoever is your provider, and you manage your data, right? For example, if you have a device that counts your number of steps, it can show you. We can deploy these in the soles in our shoes, for example. It can tell you, oh, you walked 3 miles today, but you were off a little bit. You were applying more pressure on your left heel, and whatever those data. And that may be very valuable for you. That's your data. Whereas if you take the application of the car seat, that usually belongs to the automobile manufacturer, and mostly that is designed so that they can make a better seat. And the hope is in the future, the seats are going to be dynamic, so they can adjust the seat according to the individual that is using that particular seat. So the data will belong to different entities depending on that application. Like there are many medical applications. We've deployed them in wheelchairs. We are deploying them in hospital beds. We're deploying in those kind of applications where that data, because of if you're living in the US, we have very strong privacy laws, and that data will belong to the medical provider as well as to the patient.
So Shri, I have, this is probably my last question, and because it's sort of getting to the end, but I have to, so I imagine there's a lot of places people would like to put these sensors. I love that seat example, the idea that I can tell when someone isn't sitting right or when they could adjust the seat. I mean, often I find seats have adjustments I don't even know about, and I think a sensor that you talk about could tell me, do this, do that to sit better and be better for your health. So is putting a sensor like this in cost prohibitive? What are we talking? I'm not asking about how much it is. I'm more asking about, is this adding, how should I think about this from a cost point of view?
Sure. In consumer electronic devices, which is usually the most price sensitive, if you're buying an AR, VR device for a few $100s, it's unlikely that you'll pay $1,000 for a glove. Though there may be some applications you might, but in most consumer, you're not. You're talking about something which may be like $100 or $200 type of range. So when you have something like that, the sensors within that has to be significantly less than that. So we are very price competitive, particularly because our material is fairly commonly available material. It's not exotic. Most of what we do, our core technology, is in the way we deploy our material and the background experience we have. We have a lot of patents in this space, and we manage that IP. However, the material itself is not that expensive. And the fact that we provide some real value in these applications, they're not just for entertainment. They have very practical value. And so thus far, price has not been an issue with this particular technology. And obviously, we are also expecting in certain applications like IoT, deployments not in tens or hundreds or thousands, but in millions, could even be billions in the future. And in that case, the product has to be priced very, very low in order to be able to have that kind of deployment.
Well, Shri, this was amazing. It looks like the coffee break is coming to a close. Thank you so much for being on the call with us. Kelsey, thank you. It's always good to see you, and I love the liveliness you bring to us. And with that, I want to say please join us again next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another coffee with Miss Connected and Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any of our awesome show today with Shri, stop by at my YouTube channel. You can see today's recording and past shows. And with that, I want to say thank you so much. Happy Friday, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.